Hello, and thank you for joining us on ASAP Art for today's presentation. We're grateful to the audience that is present here for a special public talk around elided art histories and intermedia and exhibitionary practices. Though our area of focus has been and is South Asia, we're committed to exploring global engagements with art that have deep resonance in the region, as we speak with Kristine Khouri about Past Disquiet and Rasha Salti, who will join us for the Q&A session. This exhibition has often been termed as an archival and documentary display, based on extensive and dynamic research conducted since 2008 by curators Kristine and Rasha. It has been touring the world since 2015. In our conversation today, the political imagination of art, artist solidarities, and museums in exile, Kristine will share with us histories of transnational solidarity networks that emerged from the International Art Exhibition for Palestine held in Beirut in 1978. A political gesture intended as a future museum for a future state, temporarily exiled in Beirut. This form of support for a free Palestine would spark the creation of 3 other museums in exile, which strove to struggle for the liberation of the Nicaraguan people, positioned itself against the Pinochet dictatorship in Chile, and brought renewed attention to the apartheid regime in South Africa. By intervening in the process of canon formation in the context of material and ideological contestation, these museums became crucial for the very development of historical consciousness and subjectivity. The articulation of alternative narratives arrived at through a reading of given political histories against the grain resonates fundamentally with our concerns at ASAP, where we consistently try to reflect on how to foreground what is hidden from view, what is unable to speak and be spoken about, and what has the potential for invigorating the present as a bearer of possibility. As we're all aware, the region being discussed today is under occupation. We're beholden to Kristine and in the Q&A to Rasha for being with us during this period, as we are taken to a time not so long ago when artists became revolutionaries, cultural workers were active members of political outfits, and exhibitions acted as spaces for fostering partisan attachments and solidarities. Tracing threads from Beirut, Baghdad, Rome, Paris, Venice, Santiago, Tokyo, and Cape Town, amongst others, the curators used the grammar of Scheherzade's frame tale to tell stories of 1001 artists and militants who had the courage to create the world they dreamed of and were fighting for, a world without walls. Recalling India's own commitments to the non-aligned movement and a third worldism that encouraged collective action, following from the 1955 Bandung Conference, Kristine and Rasha's focus on artists, grassroots collectives and unions, and the involvement in the anti-imperialist movements between the 1960s and 80s is also a reminder that the past is not over, the future is not past, and the time for political imagination and action in and through art is now. While our speakers today need no introduction for the benefit of our audience, Kristine Khouri is a researcher with a background in Arab cultural history and art history. Her interests focus on the history of art circulation, collection, exhibition, and infrastructure in the Middle East and North Africa, as well as archival practice and knowledge dissemination. She is a member of the board of the Arab Image Foundation, Beirut. Rasha Salti is a writer, researcher, and curator of art and film. She has co-curated several film programs, including with Jill Jensen, Mapping Subjectivity, Experimentation in Arab Cinema from the 1960s until now, at the Museum of Modern Art. She was one of the co-curators of the 10th edition of the Sharjah Biennale in 2010. Khouri and Salti are researchers and curators of Past Disquiet and co-editors of the accompanying publication, Past Disquiet, Artists, International Solidarity, and Museums in Exile, that was published in 2018. Before we begin, I'd like to encourage our audience members to please share any questions and comments you may have in the Q&A box, which is located at the bottom panel of your screen. We will open up the discussion to the audience towards the end of the session. And also through the discussion, we'll post some relevant links and references in the chat box. So please do keep an eye out for those. Kristine, thank you so much for being with us here today. Especially it's a really early hour. It's about 6 a.m. in LA. Without further ado, over to you.
Well, first, I want to give a huge thanks to Radhika, Aditya, and Rahab for the invitation and for the conversation that's developed into this conversation or presentation today. and I'm really looking forward to presenting Past Disquiet. So Past Disquiet, as Radhika said, is a research project which has taken the form primarily as a touring archival documentary exhibition that Rasha and myself have worked on. I like to say for the last 10 years, but the first research really began in 2008. So we're going on almost 2 decades in a few years, which is pretty amazing. And the exhibition has always been designed by a studio in Beirut, and my cat will likely join our conversation as she is right now. Has been designed by a studio in Beirut called Studio Safad. And they've been great collaborators through the evolution of the exhibition as it's toured so far in 6 places. So as was mentioned, Past Disquiet is really an exhibition of stories that have been called, this is midnight, so everyone can see she's here for the experience, of stories culled from memories, from yellowed newspaper clippings, magazines, and other publications, most of which long lost their fervor, and from photographs stored in boxes not opened in decades. From pamphlets that with procream evolutions that have lost their fervor, some that have not and are still currently struggling, as we're well aware of. And it stitches together transnational histories bound by solidarity, whose connections had for the most part been lost. Further, it maps networks of artists who are heralds of political change, who believe that art should be at the heart of everyday life in streets, schools, and public sites, and emancipated from class privilege. And their connections to militants who had believed that political change is impossible to imagine without artists. In the course of our protracted research, several maps emerged of political events, upheavals. Let's move us here. Of political events, upheavals, revolutions, and artist actions and exhibitions. The cartography of connections reveals a geography that challenges the canons of the history of art in the second half of the 20th century. Early in the research process, we encountered the notion of the museum in exile and a museum in solidarity. Consequently, we dedicated considerable effort to understanding these 2 notions and their mechanisms. By studying the traces of 4 collections, which Radhika has noted, of art collections whose history had significant intersections. So I'm just going to name them out now, and apologies that there will be a lot of names and perhaps in other languages. So the first is the International Art Exhibition for Palestine, which was presented in Beirut in 1978. The Museo Internacional de la Resistencia Salvador Allende, which is the International Resistance Museum for Salvador Allende, also known as MIRSA, organized by Chilean exiles and their supporters after the 1973 coup d'etat in Chile, as well as its earlier incarnation, the Museum of Solidarity, which was in existence from 1971 to 73. And the Museo de Arte Latinoamericano en Solidaridad con Nicaragua, so the Museum of Latin American Art in Solidarity with Nicaragua, prompted by the first Sandinista government, and the Art Against Apartheid collection, which toured internationally in the years leading up to the fall of the apartheid regime in South Africa. So this is here our process, really trying to link names, events, people. And this, in many ways, is what we're trying to do within Past Disquiet. This was our process and what is very present within the exhibition. Let me move my cat for a minute because she's going to want to really join this experience for a little too long. Okay, so our inquest began with the research into the 1978 International Art Exhibition for Palestine. Rasha and I came across the catalog for the exhibition in the library of an art gallery in Beirut early on in our research, and we were really intrigued by the scale and scope of this exhibition. There were approximately 200 artworks that were donated by almost 200 artists from 30 countries. The main text of the catalog stated that these artworks were intended as the seed collection for a future museum for Palestine, or Solidarity Museum for Palestine. The exhibition was organized by the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, through the Plastic Arts section and its Office of Unified Information. And the exhibition opened in the basement hall of the Beirut Arab University on March 21st, 1978. The director of the plastic arts section was Mona Saudi, and she was kind of overseeing or responsible for the execution of the show. And yet the exhibition has not been mentioned in any local, regional, or international art historical accounts. Neither are references to it in exhibition histories. To discover more, we had to we interviewed intellectuals, artists, writers, and other individuals and critics who were connected to the PLO and were living in Amman, Beirut, or Damascus and were active in the 1970s. So slowly, pieces of a larger puzzle emerged, and we really relied on people's memories and personal archives. So this is the invitation. The previous slide was 2 posters made for the show. You can really see the international aspect simply through language. So the International Art Exhibition catalog, the catalog for the show is our inexhaustible guide into it. It contained all of the clues to our research and that we followed, and remains the most reliable source for imagining this exhibition. The 200 artists in the exhibition, some artists like Julio Leparc, Juan Miró, Antonio Tapias were very internationally known. Others were less so. Others were entirely unknown. The progress of our research changed dramatically when we met Claude Lazare, a French artist who lives in Paris and who had been close to Palestinian militants in the 1970s. He had been a key protagonist in imagining the exhibition in Beirut as a cornerstone for a museum in exile. So this is a long video, but I will just take you kind of through. It's a bilingual catalog, and there's images of the works that were contributed to the exhibition. Just in the interest of our audience and knowledge, there was one artist from India, Krishna Reddy, participated in the exhibition. I'll share a little bit about what we learned about his participation. So what we learned from Claude was that he had mobilized a large number of artists in France to donate work to the exhibition. In May 2011, Rasha and I visited Lazare's studio, and he pulled out 3 boxes from his personal archives. One was containing magazine clippings, another newspaper clippings and photographs, and the third were facsimiles, tracts, reports, and papers related to the exhibition and his visit to Lebanon for the exhibition. He said, when we entered his studio, I've been waiting for you for 30 years. And every time I tell that story, I still get goosebumps. And Claude has been such an integral part of our research, and we owe so much to him. So the exhibition was inaugurated only 1 week prior. 1 week prior to the opening, Israel invaded Lebanon. This unfortunately sounds very familiar these days, advancing as far as the Litani River and the outskirts of the city of Tyre to stop PLO commando incursions that were launched from the southern Lebanese border. The incursion lasted a week and concluded with a UN-brokered truce and the deployment of UN-sponsored peacekeeping forces to oversee the implementation of the accord. Despite grave security concerns, Yasser Arafat attended the exhibition opening, accompanied by the PLO's highest-ranking cadres. And in addition to the Beirut's intelligentsia, visitors included rank-and-file fighters, diplomats, journalists, and a dozen international artists, as well as the general public. In an interview recorded in Ramallah, Ahmed Abdulrahman, the head of the PLO's Office of Unified Information at that time, underlies the importance of inviting artists to witness firsthand the reality of the struggle. So here you have some images from the exhibition of the opening, and over time, we were really trying to figure out who these people were, if we could identify them. And over the years, we slowly were able to identify some people, such as the GDR's cultural attaché or ambassador. So some of the artists who visited were Claude Lazare, Gontran Guanes Neto, originally from Brazil, who was residing in Paris, Bruno Caruso, and Paolo Ganna, both from Italy, and Mohamed Melihi. Michel Troche, a prominent French curator and critic, came at the end of the exhibition. And Liana Badid, a Palestinian writer who was living in Beirut at that time, was also interviewed in the process of our research, and she recalls with emotion how important it was for the exhibition for Palestinians, and really the joy of seeing in person original artworks by renowned Arab artists and international artists. and Nasser Soumi, a Palestinian artist who's living in Beirut, who assisted in the exhibition's organization, surveyed visitors during the first days following the opening of the exhibition and indexed really their reactions. Here, there's a few images of an exhibition that took place a couple of months later in the courtyard of the university after a collective atelier or workshop of artists took place. These are some of the PLO representatives and officials going through the exhibition. And this is in one of the collective studios. This is Claude Zaha on the left, Nasser Soumi and Khalil Akkari. So works from the collection traveled to Japan in the same year, courtesy of the PLO's office, and in the following years to Tehran and to Norway. In 1982, the Israeli military advanced into Beirut again, holding the city under siege with the objective of forcing the PLO to leave Lebanon. The building where the collection of artworks had been stored was shelled, along with the offices of the Unified Information, which housed the plastic art section and the exhibition documents. All that really remained of the inner story of the International Art Exhibition for Palestine were the memories of the people who made it and the people who visited and participated in it. Some works have been found over time. That's not been the focus of our research, but I have more information on that if you're interested. So two major questions emerged when we kind of spent time with this catalog and started interviewing people. Was really, number one, what was the story of a museum in Solidarity? Where did it emerge from? And also, what were the networks that enabled this exhibition? How did so many artists come to participate in this exhibition? How were they contacted? What were their political, what was their practice like? What were their political engagements like? And so those were the kind of two kind of questions that over time led our research, and also was sort of the two kind of lines, I would say, or stories that we're trying to tell within Past Disquiet. I'm going to show a brief video of our first interview with Claude when we met him in 2011 here.
L'accrochage, les artistes.
Et donc après, comment vous vous rappelez de comment l'idée de l'expo est venue et comment c'était comment l'histoire de l'expo s'est produite? Vous avez voyagé avec eux?
Oui, j'ai été, ah oui, alors là, je suis en revenant avec les centres de Beyrouth, ça fait un peu long. Et donc, on avait depuis longtemps parlé, parce qu'on se voyait très souvent le week-end chez moi, parce qu'il changeait d'adresse, de ville, ce soir. Et moi, ça me tenait à cœur de faire un musée d'art contemporain pour la Palestine. Parce que je savais que ce que je vous disais tout à l'heure sur cette liaison des artistes, en l'occurrence, sur cette question-là, on n'aurait pas de mal de regrouper des œuvres pour faire un musée d'art contemporain. Donc, je lui parlais, il faudrait qu'on trouve un lieu, un endroit. Et j'ai parlé aussi du musée en exil Salvatore Allende, qui est actuellement à Valparaiso, où des artistes avaient donné en 1973 des œuvres pour le musée en exil Salvatore Allende. Donc j'ai d'ailleurs une œuvre sur la question palestinienne qui a ce musée. Et donc, bon, j'avais donné cette toile pour le musée Salvatore Allende. Donc, je parlais de ce musée, que ça peut être intéressant, de faire un musée en exil et de l'installer dans la Palestine libérée, libre et démocratique, d'un futur très proche. Et un jour, bon, c'est resté comme ça en suspens. Un jour, il dit, écoute, il y a des gens qui, à Beyrouth, ont décidé de faire une exposition internationale pour la Palestine. Alors là, je ne sais pas si c'est lui qui a impulsé l'idée en leur disant il faut faire quelque chose, ou ça vient de la base. Il a dit il faut prendre en charge le regroupement de tableaux pour une exposition internationale pour la Palestine. Et il y avait Mona Saoudi aussi qui venait de Beyrouth, qui avait contacté des artistes qu'elle connaissait, que moi je ne connaissais pas, comme Marfin, etc., Mata. Et pour amener des œuvres, moi, je me suis occupé des artistes, une partie des artistes de la jeune peinture.
So here we learned from Claude a few years into our research, about 3 years in, about a collection for Chile. That's the first time we heard about it. And kind of a story of one of the genesis of the exhibition. And this completely opened up our research beyond just this exhibition in Beirut. We were curious about this collection or museum for Chile, understanding that there were multiple people involved in obviously finding or recruiting artists to donate works from France, Mona himself and others. This jeune peinture, which we end up spending a lot of time researching, which Claude was a part of. So really that was a really important shift or moment in our research in 2011, a few years into the research. So I just want to address this question of this Museum of Solidarity, which kind of define it, which is a collection of artworks that's donated by artists, their gift being a political gesture intended to demonstrate their support for a movement of national liberation, a struggle for justice, or equality. And the form of a museum in exile is often the form that they would take of the ones that we were looking at, a collection or museum living outside of the country or cause they're supporting in exile and touring until it can return or go home. Move here so you start getting some images. Solidarity collections are important models of museology that have been almost entirely marginalized in the annals of art history and museum studies. These collections are emancipated from systems of power and patronage to which museums are usually beholden. They're neither symbols of wealth accrued through the exploitation of human beings or natural resources, nor are they legacies of colonialism. And they really represent a thoroughly subversive interpretation of museums, and their collections are donated usually in the names of people and not in governments. So even in the case of Allende, it was really in terms of the people, but he kind of represented the people. So in the same visit in Paris in 2011, we had the opportunity to meet with two artists, Julia Leparc and Gontran Neto. Gontran would come to Beirut. They said when we met with them, yes, we gave to Palestine, and we also gave to Chile, but we also gave to Nicaragua and South Africa. So that really was a moment where we, our heads started spinning. That's, again, how kind of the research continued to emerge over the years. So what we learned was, in fact, that there were many of the same actors or artists who participated in these other collections and building them and in donating works. So kind of go throughout this talk, kind of go between kind of the telling the stories of like a few of the networks and moments that we looked at, but also the museums, also through the images of Past Disquiet in its tour. So as we heard from Claude, one of the geneses of the exhibition in Beirut was in fact this collection for Chile or MIRSA. So I just want to say over the following years from 2011 to 15, we looked into those three collections, some with success, some with many dead ends. But the question and line of pursuit of the Solidarity Museum or Museum in Exile persisted. The other kind of question was this, that we pursued were networks, primarily behind the Beirut exhibition. So I'll just show you, this was the first version of the show in 2015. We were invited by Bartomeu Marí, then director of the Macba in Barcelona. He invited us to share our research. We weren't sure what that would look like, but it forced us to think about how to transform what we had found into something that the public could understand. So what that was in the end and continues to be is an exhibition, archival exhibition. There are no original documents. They're all reproductions or facsimiles and videos, which are edited to tell stories, whether it's the story of a museum, the story of our process. Even those two videos that you saw clips of are in the exhibition. And we can speak later, maybe in the Q&A, about why we never use original documents. So short, just to kind of give you a little brief on the collection for Chile and its its history. Shortly after his popular unity government took power in 1971, Chilean President Salvador Allende drafted a call to artists to donate artworks in solidarity with the people of Chile, the first nation in South America to elect a socialist government democratically. The call was disseminated actively by an international committee. It was presided over by Brazilian art critic and militant Mario Pedrosa, who was then exiled in Chile. There were, I can go through names, but there are a pretty incredible number of committee members from around the world who were part of this call. The works were presented as the Museo de la Solidaridad, which was inaugurated in 1972 in Santiago. The collection kept growing after that exhibition, and it was deemed one of the most compelling at the time. It comprised of more than 600 works donated by artists from across the world just in 2 years' time. After the Pinochet coup, several prominent Chilean exiles, among them Miriam Contreras, Allende's former secretary who had escaped to Cuba, as well as Jose Balmes, Mario Pedrosa, and Miguel Rojas Mix, all fled to Paris, decided to launch a second call for artists to donate in a new Solidarity collection. This is called the International Resistance Museum for Salvador Allende, which was conceived really as a museum in exile and presented as an itinerant exhibition. So there were committees set up in countries around the world, including Algeria, Colombia, Cuba, Finland, France, Italy, Mexico, Spain, Sweden, Panama, Poland, the US, Venezuela. So where there were committees, there often were exhibitions that were held to show that collection or artists who gave from that country, but also from the whole around the world. And over the years, this collection toured really as a museum in exile. And for us, that's where that kind of concept emerges. In 1990, during the presidency of Patricio Aylwin, the process to repatriate the various segments of the collection had been compiled or had been begun around the world. And the Salvador Allende Foundation was instituted by presidential decree to kind of take on that undertaking. Under a third and current name today, the Museo de la Solidaridad Salvador Allende, so the Museum of Solidarity Salvador Allende, was inaugurated in Santiago in 1991. The museum has since moved, and today the collection comprises of more than 2,700 artworks from 3 phases of its evolution. And so I come back to kind of this image of drawing these networks. So what we were trying to understand were how did artists come to be a part of this exhibition in Beirut, but also Chile, and what were the overlaps of names that came to participate in it. And I'm kind of hopping around, but just want to kind of highlight a few different kind of moments of networks that emerged. One of the big things that emerged for us early on was understanding the role the PLO had and their role in understanding and supporting art and culture. And that often was through PLO representatives who are based in different countries around the world. They're essentially ambassadors without there being official embassies. Uncovering the role of a number of these people, for example, Hazzedine Kalak in Paris, which Claude refers to, as having had a very important role for him, but also other artists and writers, and really believing that art was the most important way to kind of change people's hearts and minds. There were other individuals over the years that we had met, representatives or people who had passed, but we came to know. In Japan, for example, the PLO representative there, the one in Poland, the one in Morocco, over the years were very supportive of artists. So whether that would facilitate the tour of the collection, organizing exhibitions of folklore. I can go on, but I just want to note that that was one of the most important networks that emerged in understanding the role of the PLO and culture within the PLO. And so Hazzedine was one of those figures that was really a ghost to us who was following Russia more around than I. And so we highlighted in that first version of the show himself, who he was, and kind of what his role was within, especially within the French kind of intellectual and artistic scene. With that, a couple of other networks that emerged that I'll highlight were some, Claude mentioned the Jeune Peinture, which was a kind of an artist-led salon that was, organized by artists every year and really radicalized after 1968 and the protests in Paris. And the different they organized themselves around collectives after 1968. Artists were not showing their work individually, but in fact around collectives. So there were domestic issues and international issues, and Palestine was one of those international issues around which artists organized themselves. So there was one group within the Salon La Jeune Peinture, which means young painters, called the Collectif Palestine, so the Palestine Collective. They made murals together, they met, they organized together actions in public spaces. And that sort of connected us to an artist who was in Italy, in Tuscany, who was part of a collective there called Archicoda, of artists who were politically engaged and did work around Chile and Palestine. And it was really through these personal archives that stories emerged of interventions in public space during the Venice Biennial in 1976 about Tel Zata, the Palestinian camp in Beirut that was under siege. So these are just some of the kind of many stories that I'm really just superficially touching on that emerge and that we sort of share within Past Disquiet. So in 2016, we were invited to do this show in Germany, in Berlin, and there at the core, the question of the institution was really about the art historical canon and questioning where the center was and what the art historical canon was. So we had the opportunity to sort of reframe some of our questions, not only about the question of museums and museological history, but we also had the opportunity to do research in Germany and understand sort of the links between artists in Germany at that time that maybe were not explicit within the exhibition, but understanding what the solidarity movement or what the connections between the Palestinian struggle and artists in Germany was like. We also, through the research here, and this is sort of the decentering of exhibitions that we address in this version of the show, where we start seeing that New York in the 70s is not the center of the stories we were looking at, but in fact, other parts of the world. One of the stories that emerged through our research was about the GDR Artists Union and their exchange with Palestinian artists in Beirut in the late 70s, early 80s. And so a group of German artists came to Lebanon. We had the opportunity to meet a few of them and kind of hear their stories. This is the case where you would think these very official kind of government connections would lead to, I don't know, perhaps like not as deep relationships or experiences, but people came and witnessed and came back and they're really affected by their time in Lebanon and their work. The other stories that emerged were of Chilean mural brigades, muralistas, and their work, Chilean artists and German artists in Germany at that time. So that sort of was one of the extensions of one thing that we see in many of the countries throughout the 1970s. So mural made in Documenta in 1976, if I'm remembering, 74. And so some of these stories really, emerged through the possibility of doing the research changed over the years, and our presentation of the research changed over the years because of support from the host institutions to host Past Disquiet, that we in fact could add new research, which is what makes every version of the show different and exciting. In those years also, we had the opportunity to go to Japan and do research and understand the kind of the link, because the highest number of participating artists in the exhibition in Beirut were from France, Italy, Poland, and Japan, and Iraq. And so understanding what the links were in terms of Japanese solidarity for Palestine and the role of the PLO's office was really an incredible opportunity, and incredible stories, emerged from that. Here's some of the materials from solidarity committees, from the PLO's office, around film screenings, exhibitions, poster exhibitions, and this was primarily, I would say, in the late 70s, mid 70s to early 80s. And it really was at the moment, a lot of it was when the one PLO representative, Fatih Abdul Hamid, was there, and he played that important role. And in Hungary, these were some of the PLO's folklore exhibitions. So there were opportunities for Arafat to come and maybe have meetings, and at the same time have, kind of show that there is a history of existence in Palestine, which is what these exhibitions of folklore were doing. So in 2018, we had the opportunity to do the show in Chile at the Museum of Solidarity Salvador Allende. And that was an incredible opportunity to work with them and to be able to bring the story home to Chile. That was sort of the first moment we were able to do that. We also, because of the research and the support from the museum, had the opportunity to do research in Nicaragua, which until then was pretty minimal, and information that we had. And so in 2017, we went to Nicaragua, and they were interested in this collection in Nicaragua because the woman, Carmen Vaux, who you see here, was the first director of the museum in Chile after the fall of Pinochet. And she had been one of the main organizers of this collection in Nicaragua. I'll show you some exhibition images from Chile, and then I'll sort of tell you that story of the Nicaragua exhibition. So this is the third collection we're addressing. So in 1980, during a festival in Rome that was held to celebrate the anniversary of the first Sandinista revolution in Nicaragua, Ernesto Cardenal, you'll see him in the center bottom with the black hat. He was a renowned poet and minister of culture in the new Nicaraguan government. And Carmen Va, on the left and in the previous image, a Chilean gallerist and arts administrator who played a role in establishing MIRSA, had met. It was there that the idea for a museum in solidarity with the Nicaraguan people was born. Law had spearheaded the project, and a year later, exhibitions opened in Paris and Madrid. And up here at the top, you see the poster for the exhibition in Paris. Latin American artists, mostly in exile in Europe, and Spanish artists donated works to build a collection. Many had also given to the Chilean Museum Initiative. The overall collection of nearly 300 works was sent to Managua, the capital of Nicaragua, and was inaugurated in December 1982. After which time it continued to grow, and it operated as the Museum of Contemporary Latin American Art in Managua. In 1985, it was renamed the Museo Julio Cortázar, Museum of Julio Cortázar, in acknowledgement of the writer's attachment to Nicaragua. Over the years, in the 1980s, things were very complicated and difficult in Nicaragua. From 88 to 94, the collection was expropriated by government officials. It was dispersed because of disagreements that broke out between elected officials and the collection's custodians. And recently there have been attempts to reopen a museum of what remains of the collection, but the initiative has been delayed a number of times. Till today, the collection is stored at the Palacio Nacional de la Cultura and includes about 1,900 works by 923 artists from 36 countries. And so this was the first time we were really able to share much more information and research around this collection in Nicaragua that we previously didn't have. And Claude had mentioned, and you heard in the interview, that he gave a work to Chile and to Palestine. Here we see in an exhibition organized between that Collectif Palestine in Paris and Archicoda in Italy, an exhibition in Italy in public space. And you actually see both of the works. The work in the center is the work he gave to the museum in Chile, the work on the right to Beirut. And you start kind of looking back at images and understanding that there were connections between these works and, kind of bonded histories between these collections that we otherwise wouldn't have known. And so here is the work on the left in storage in Chile, and then Claude looking at the work he gave to Beirut to the Palestinian collection on the right. Kind of flipping it, so we did the show in Chile, and then we had the opportunity to bring home the story to Beirut also in 2018, which was another kind of obviously a home to sort of bring the story back. We were able to, over time, one individual, Ernest, who I'll speak about, found more documents related to the collection against apartheid, which we're able to show in this edition that we couldn't show in previous editions. A film by a Syrian director kind of emerged from a dinner party conversation. And Russia went on a wild goose chase to find it and digitize this film. And and I'll kind of show you some screenshots of or some screen captures from it. And so, so there's kind of new research that emerged every time. And this film kind of brought Izzedine Kalak back to life because he was present in this film. So here's some exhibition views from Sursuk, lounging. And you can sort of see how the display changes over time depending on the space and our own kind of interaction with the materials and of course, working with the designers. So these are some stills from the film, Jean Genet, Izzedine. Around the same year, we also published a book. We never had a catalog for the show, and the book contains not only interviews that we had done in the research process, but also commissioned essays. Maybe hard to find a physical copy, but you can purchase digital copies online. So I'll speed through the end because I know I'm past time, but I'll address that fourth museum, which is the Art Against Apartheid collection. So in 1979, inspired by Mirza, Ernest Pino-Ernest, and Antonio Saura, who was exiled in Paris because of the Franco dictatorship in Spain, decided to establish a museum in exile in the form of an itinerant exhibition of artworks incarnating international artist support, or rather denunciation of the apartheid regime in South Africa. And they established the Artists of the World Against Apartheid Committee to oversee this collection of artworks. This also basically started in the 1980s, and around 100 works by 96 artists were assembled. The first show opened in Paris in 1983, and the work was really, Ernest was kind of approached by the UN to establish this committee and imagine what support for in the kind of bringing artist support against the apartheid regime would look like. And because of his contribution and experience with these other collections and his all political commitment, these are right here. This is an image of his work. That was seriographs that were put up when the Nice, the city he's from in southern France, was twinned with Cape Town in the 1970s. You know, he pasted this up the whole way of the way that the mayor would have driven through Cape Town, driven through Nice. So a reminder and kind of just this appall at the fact that his city was twinned with a city under apartheid. The same work he gave to the collection in Beirut. So again, we find kind of these links. So works were collected, and then posters were made from the works as well. They were sold in cooperation with the UN to raise money for the UN Special Committee Against Apartheid. So not only was there a tour of artworks, but also a tour and sale of posters. So this collection traveled to over a dozen countries after its first show in Paris in 1983, to Denmark, the Federal Republic of Germany, Finland, Greece, Guadeloupe, Haiti, Italy, Japan, Korea, Martinique, the Netherlands, Spain, Sweden, Tunisia, the UK, the US, and a few other countries. That's the cover of the catalog for the show, and its most remarkable tour was in Japan, which took place over a 2-year period in the late 80s, and it kind of was able to move around because of a truck that was built to house the collection, and it visited 194 venues, traveled for 500 days, and 380,000 people saw this collection. So after the collapse of the regime, the collection was donated to the government of South Africa, and here the works are put in the seats of parliament, and the collection was placed in the custody of the Maibui Center at the University of Western Cape, which also safeguards one of the largest archives of liberation struggle materials in South Africa. And after 5 years of Past Disquiet kind of being quiet, after 2018, the last version of our show, we were invited to do the show in Cape Town. So another return of the story home in August 2023 at Zuid-Smoka. And here are just a couple of images. And earlier this year, we were also invited to do the show in Paris. So another return home to a city that was really the center for, you know, the intersection of these 4 different collections in many ways. So, you know, after those 5 years, we did not think that the show would come back to life, but having the opportunity to do it in those 2 places was really significant. So I'll maybe end with, here's a couple images from Paris, and I'll end with a quote. I know past time. This is an image from the exhibition in Beirut of a work by Jacques Monory, a French artist, who the work, you know, is called Murder Number 5. On the right is a mirror, it's broken, and you see an image of a future event. So we started looking at images differently throughout the process. And here we see Azzedine Khalek, the PLO's representative, who was in fact assassinated upon his return to Paris on August 3rd, 1978. So just several months after the exhibition's opening. There's a quote by Dan Eagleman that Rasha and I paraphrase and think about a lot, which is that 3 people die. People die 3 times. The first is when your heart or body ceases to function. The second is when your body is buried underground or consigned to the grave. And the third is at some point in the future when your name is spoken for the very last time. And so through this process, speaking people's names, bringing people back, and telling their stories is one of the most important things that this project does for us, and hopefully will do for other people. So I will stop and we'll get into the Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you, Kristine, for sharing with us 2 decades of work in less than 30, 35 minutes. I think that's a really hard task to accomplish. And each strand of what you've laid out as a certain cartography of resistance seems to have a sort of life of its own. And what seems very interesting and relevant in the current moment is, I think, the idea of art as activism, but also activism as art. Just to say that the floor is now open for discussion. Please to write in with your questions and comments in the Q&A box. And while we give our audiences a few moments to sort of gather their thoughts, I'd like to welcome Rasha. Rasha, hello. And maybe just start us off with a few curiosities. The more than questions, they're just, I think, things that are very exciting. I found a quote from Claude Lazare that I've been waiting for 30 years, almost sort of speaks to a history that's waiting to be told. And this seems to be made possible. I think in your publication, you mentioned, both of you mentioned that there's a prehistory to the 78 exhibition that harkens back to sort of, which is often neglected, the Arab biennales in Baghdad and Rabat, and a pan-Arab moment. And I was wondering if there is a sort of productive tension between solidarity at the grassroots level that on the one hand, and then a more kind of officially sanctioned solidarity, especially from Poland and Yugoslavia. And how do you make sense of that today when sort of global political map of ideological positions is so different? And what then becomes of the idea of solidarity to make possible something like this?
Should I start, Rasha, or do you want to take it?
I'll give you a little break. Maybe you need water.
Sure.
I'll start with the second question, but there's also one in the chat box, in the Q&A chat box. Anyway, I'll start with the second question on solidarity that is from the ground up versus solidarity. So basically, the period we were looking at or coincides with the Cold War. And one of the first things that, I think we physically translated that exercise into an object, into a figure in the edition that we showed in Berlin. But basically what's really interesting about the research is that it showed how actually the fractured lines of the Cold War are not relevant or not visible. We went through the exercise of mapping, in tracing the history of one exhibition. We pinpointed other exhibitions that either were the precursors or have fed it or happened afterwards, inspired from it. Kind of like a mind map of exhibition histories. And in doing that, we, and when you pinpoint the locations, the cities, if you look at just the 1970s, when the, mainstream books about art history will tell you that was the moment when the world, like the capital of art, moved from Paris to New York. And that's basically because the market moved from Paris to New York. I think on our map, you only find one event in New York and a lot in Paris, but you also find that, you find that the line between East and Western Europe or East and Western world does not exist. And you find also that there's a lot that happens in the global South. So in Baghdad, in Rabat, in Botswana, in Gaborone, in Tokyo, and so on, and Casablanca, and so forth. So basically, I think the research does this thing of decentering the canons of art history. To go to solidarity, indeed, histories of, so first of all, in the Soviet camp, in the former Eastern Europe, solidarity was policy. It was like foreign policy. And the state had established institutions to basically make manifestations of that solidarity facilitated. So, for example, if we take the case of Poland, and I would say Yugoslavia was not part of the world, it was different, it operated differently. But if we take the case of Poland, there was an institution that was specifically dedicated to collecting artworks from artists so basically artists donated some of their artworks to this institution, and that institution was in charge of exhibiting them in Poland, elsewhere in the world, but also sometimes also donated them. So when we had the opportunity to travel to Poland and interview some of the Polish artists who were still alive and who had donated artworks, they were not aware that their artworks had been donated. Most art historians of the Cold War era in the former East will basically dismiss a lot of these gestures of state-sanctioned gestures of solidarity as performative, as not politically charged or significant. And, they have a lot of reasons to do that. Most of these reasons are convincing. But I think what we found also is not the exception, but basically in these explanations, there's always cracks. And one of the most interesting cracks we found was we were visiting this German artist who basically lives in Cottbus, but he's basically from the former Eastern Germany, from the GDR, German Democratic Republic. And we were leafing through his sketchbook. He was super generous. He allowed us to spend time in his studio. His name is Gunther Rechner. He's still alive, still very, very active, quite wonderful guy, and beautiful artist. Anyway, so we were going through his studio, asking him questions, asking him to recall his time in Beirut, because he had visited Beirut with a delegation of other East German artists at the time. And of course, they had a government minder with them. But we picked up a sketchbook and we were leafing through it, and we recognized a lot of people from his sketches, artists who had been killed. And we saw a portrait of a man with glasses, with his head wrapped in a kufiya. And so we were very curious. Like we asked him, they said that they visited refugee camps, and we asked him if he actually asked a Palestinian to pose for him for this portrait. And he said that this was him. It was a self-portrait. It was his own portrait as a Palestinian. So it was interesting for us because this was a slip in the program. This was the crack. Artists were supposed to feel empathy. They were supposed to engage, but they were not supposed to identify. That movement, that gesture, that shift in position, whether it was playful or whatever its intention was, indicates that not, in authoritarian regimes, in dictatorships, etc., there will always be slips, and we need to make sure to find them. I think that was your question about grassroots. The explanation for this relationship to the former East is very simple. Because international friendship and solidarity was the Soviet language for international relations, and they allowed the PLO to open offices under the guise of international friendship. So the PLO was able to send students to study in all of the countries of the former East, get free education, medicine, engineering, but also art and film. I don't remember your first question. Maybe Kristine will answer.
Mm-hmm. Kristine, do you want to add?
I think Rasha did a good job, but I think that's her speaking about the slips and cracks and an assumed narrative or assuming something is something maybe we could go in with at some point, assuming something about the number of artists or the artists who participated from a country, but that's what research is, and having the opportunity to speak to those people is what changes those things, those narratives. So.
Yeah, it's also fascinating because I think this return to we're all Palestinians seems to be recurring again. And it's interesting that the image of the portrait is fascinating. But I'll quickly read out the question from the audience, just in the interest of time, because it's from Richard Finley Fletcher. I have two related questions for Kristine and Rasha. One, in the places the exhibition has traveled around the world, has there been any response by artists to somehow supplement the exhibition with new works to create a new Solidarity Museum for Palestine, directly inspired by the exhibition? And the second question, has the exhibition already traveled or plan to travel to the US? If not, is a reason bound up with current cultural erasure and silencing of Palestinian perspectives and voices?
Rasha, do you want to, can you want to say something before? And then maybe you want to answer the first question?
Yes, I mean, I think the American living in America will answer the question about America. But on artist responses, so we mention it in the exhibition, but of course in concise presentations, we do not have the opportunity to mention it. But basically one of Ezzedine Kalak's closest friends, also brilliant theorist and writer and translator, Elias Sambar, a Palestinian intellectual who's been living in France since the early 70s. He was for a while the head of the Palestinian delegation at UNESCO. He decided more than 10 years ago to basically launch this idea again. And has been appealing to, well, it started with French artists and now it's, expanding bigger. Of course, so basically he's been calling on artists to donate artworks to build a museum, and he's collected a significant number of artworks. The problem that he faces, so he's wonderful because he decided that this museum is going to happen regardless. And he's found or identified the piece of land in Jerusalem where the museum will be built. He's completely undeterred, and you can hold up the newspaper to his face and he's going to say, so what? I'm going to make this museum. So it's great. The problem, of course, that he has is finding storage, appropriate storage for the artworks. And for a while, there was the town of Belfort had a communist mayor who loved Palestinians, so he allowed him, he had given him the appropriate climate-controlled storage, but then he was voted out, and now it is at the Institut du Monde Arabe storage facility in Paris or near Paris, and every year Elias finds a way to exhibit the new donations at the Institut du Monde Arabe. Actually, and it was an incredible exhibition, and it had upward of 90,000 visitors, which is a big number for a country like France, probably not for India. But anyway, the exhibition was titled, "What Can Palestine Teach the World?" or "What the World Can Learn from Palestine."
Thank you.
I'll find a link and I'll share it. Let me put a link just here as well. Here's a link to a review of it, so you will have it. Doing the show in the US, at the beginning, we were invited. We've primarily been invited by institutions or to pursue different institutions. It took years for us to do the show in Paris. That years later there was interest to host it. In the US, we've given talks before, and there's someone who's really interested in trying to find a way now, I would say in the last year, to bring the show to the US. I think even before the genocide began, a very particular kind of institution needs to be interested in engaging with this history. So there hadn't been any active pursuits prior to, last year. And I would say now maybe there is interest, at least by some people, to find a way to bring it here. We often think about university galleries as being a good place because it's an opportunity to do education and conferences and really speak, because this is really a research-based exhibition, and maybe not typical exhibition because there's no original artwork. But so far, when you look at all the universities and what they're doing to pro-Palestine protesters, and of course the conflation of anti-Semitism with pro-Palestinian support, is a huge issue. And so far, no plans. Feel free to reach out if there's an institution interested. And yeah, so I wouldn't say right now, maybe if there was interest and it was knocked down, maybe because of the silencing. But otherwise, I would say, I don't know if the US is a particular place. And it's certainly, I would hope, possible at some point, because I think this history is very important. And of course, local stories can be told with that as well.
Yeah, but we're opening in Amsterdam, February 27, 2025, at an amazing space called Framer Framed.
Yeah, so the show is continuing. Unfortunately, it's still very relevant. And so, that there's engagement with it is exciting, but difficult.
I guess just on that note, I suppose also when speaking about decentering the canon, did you find more links with South Asia? The Krishna Reddy example was fascinating, and it would be really interesting to know that, we know that there were people going to Lebanon in that period, but.
Krishna, the story of Krishna is he was very intertwined with artists. He went to the Sila Festival in Morocco. That was, I think, the work that he made there was the one that was sent to Beirut. And so, we can sort of see through his friendships with Mona Saudi, with Nasser Sumi, and through these graphic workshops, basically. That's how he kind of came to be a part of the exhibition. When it comes to artistic practice, I would say there's other sides. There's a woman named Sabah Haidar who's done a lot of work around Pakistani fighters in Lebanon, fighting alongside the PLO. There's a history of that with Japanese fighters in the Japan Red Army as well. She's a reference in terms of her work, in terms of looking at that kind of relationship. And Naim Haimin is a great reference in terms of, kind of Bangladesh and kind of the history of Bangladesh and Palestinian struggles intertwined, in terms of doing, kind of Indian artists specifically and their engagement. It's not something that has come up in the research specifically. And Rasha, tell me if I'm missing something, but I think there's an opportunity to kind of look into that. And we'll say there's been an invitation to figure out a way to bring the show to India, and that would potentially be an opportunity. But also, I think what also comes out of the exhibition is, or talking about it, is people's own research. And so I think that's really important and exciting. It's not about us doing this research, but maybe this inspiring research, and us supporting people in whatever way we can.
You have to imagine that the exhibition is actually second generation after non-alignments. So it's in a way, it's not on the ruins, but on the perceived failure or end of the non-alignment. But still, I think what we uncovered is super interesting. In Japan, this Japanese Afro-Asian Latin American Artist Association is a deliberately third worldist Japanese Artist Association. And all they did was work with Thailand and South Korea, specifically to deconstruct Japan's colonial history. So in a way, if you want, when you open up this Pandora's box, the stuff that comes up, we had no idea that there had been biennials of Arab art, for example. They were a complete disaster, but still they happened. And for them to happen, there were a lot of conferences that took place. And I would argue that, whatever was going on in India, if I think of the school of, the school of indigenous art everything is gone now in my brain, the name, the region, whatever. But these famous artists had come out of there, that were in the stupid Les Magiciens de la Terre. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But this kind of bringing in local know-how, local expressions of art, and giving them a space to express themselves and giving them a space to exhibit, etc. There are echoes of that elsewhere, that in the region that we found, not in the African continent, in sub-Saharan region also, that so maybe they were not direct connections, but they were resonances, if you'd like.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I mean, I think also Faiz Ahmad Faiz, who was a writer, but also was, I think, at one point the editor of Lotus, and when he was exiled from Pakistan, actually was in Lebanon and friends with Mahmoud Darwish. And but I think just on that note, because one of the questions and concerns that we as South Asians, but even otherwise, in I think the artistic community, in a period of sort of unfathomable loss, and especially given a lot of these artworks were destroyed in 82, when Lebanon was, by the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. And there is a way in which you are archiving also practices of loss. And I'm just wondering, in this current moment, how do you see, perhaps, I mean, this is also a note of advice, I suppose, to some of us, how do you see structures of solidarity within the artistic community, and also in terms of providing perhaps some material, concrete support, right? What is the meaning of solidarity? Take on for you, perhaps, in this moment.
I mean, okay, we are at a moment where the period we are studying, the PLO, is massive. It's thriving, it's structured, and it has resources. And it produced all these marvelous things: posters, pedagogically vanguard publishing houses for children, film awards, films, and so on and so forth. Okay, now the PLO is non-existent, and the Palestinian National Authority is defunct and completely useless, and it is bankrupt, or it has it's corrupt, and it has no money. So at the same time, we are witnessing a groundswell of solidarity from actually very precarious communities that we had never hoped, like students. They put at risk their diplomas. I mean, some of them were not able to graduate. They put at risk their employment futures. The communities that are, at least in insane countries like Germany or in the rest of Europe, that really put themselves at risk is the trans community. So, or in a very precarious community. They took risks. They reject all forms of self-censorship. And this is not the work of the PLO. It's not the PLO funding this kind of solidarities. And in North America, the other massive, wonderful groundswell is from Native communities, Native Americans, First Nations, etc. This also, the PLO would have never had the intelligence to reach out to them. This happened spontaneously. This happened probably because of years of work and build up by Palestinian militants and activists. But it's interesting that that this is what we have now, and is the only balm to the wound, is these solidarities.
Kristine, would you like to?
I think this is what Rasha said, like these precarious communities putting themselves out there in support of Palestine, and these quotes that emerge and of historical individuals who say, we're not free till everyone's free, right? And to like really understand what care for people around the world means for them, but also for oneself, I think is, you know, a narrative that some people are seeing and understanding. And I think to like really understand that and to at the core and think about that question of when someone is marginalized, what that does to other communities and what that means to one's own values, I think is really important. Because unfortunately, I think sometimes people have to be centered in someone else's cause. And so maybe for some people, that's what needs to happen. For others, it doesn't. And yeah, it's incredible to see, and also at moments feels completely hopeless. So I think it's really hard. Yeah, there's no answer. I think, I would even say there's an amazing poster archive in Los Angeles called the Center for the Study of Political Graphics. They've been around for 35 years. And they don't change their political position. And that even in the work that they're doing in archiving, but also in just promoting and acknowledging the current work that's going on. I think that there's institutions that are engaged. When we see all the institutions that don't care and don't say a thing, that we got to look at the small ones, right? And remember that it's those organizations and the people behind them and the people that support them that are, is where we need to look and to find camaraderie and allyship.
Yeah, I think, just if not in the last many years, but in the last year, what seems to have really come back to us is that all of our freedom is tied in with each other, and there is nothing, without us all being kind of part of this movement in a way. And on that note, I think we'd love to go on, but we've gone far beyond the time. And I just want to say thank you so much for Kristine and Rasha for a sobering and yet very hopeful conversation. I think it's going to leave all of us with plenty to think about, especially I think the question of really what is to be done, which remains a big prerogative. And thank you also to our audiences for being with us today. Just as information, the conversation will be uploaded within a week on both the app and the website. And please do keep a lookout for our upcoming coverage next month as well. We did Past Disquiet today, but next month we'll be covering a festival by the India Foundation for the Arts called Past Forward, and also the Dharamshala International Film Festival. And our next talk will be with filmmaker Avijit Mukul Kishore. So please do stay tuned in, and thank you so much. Have a lovely evening and a lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you again. Thanks to all those attending. And again, thank you to the team at ASAP for the invitation.
Bye.
Bye.